Thank you. Love you. Okay, there we go. So mine should be down, and Romey, yours should go up now if you'd like.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I'm not sharing just yet.
Okay, just go take your time.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to say something. So I feel super guilty not supporting our Audubon chapter here with something for the raffle. So I've decided that I'd like to donate 3 framed photographs of Devil's River corridor birds for that raffle as an item. Hopefully you can raise a few more dollars off of those. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah, Patsy, I'll connect with you. At least one of those photographs y'all will see tonight, and then the others I'll fish around in the archives for you.
Well, I've seen your photographs, and I'm thrilled. Thank you so much, Romey. That's very kind of you. Absolutely. We're always glad to have Romey come by. We call him Cuz. He's in Audubon, Texas, and so he's in our Audubon system. And he is the director of conservation strategy for Audubon, Texas. And in that capacity, he works with everybody that'll listen and work with him, state, national, international, he doesn't care. He wants to identify and advance important strategies in conservation to benefit birds, the landscapes, the communities, that we all are in this together and we all depend on one another. So that's what he does. And he knows what he's talking about. He's got lots of good education. He's got a lot of good experience. And I think he can almost talk the bark off a tree. He has just got the best, wonderful, persuasive speech, and you will enjoy. He's a delight. But his message for us tonight is this. You're going to learn what a SGCN is, but it's basically natural habitat and open spaces are disappearing. And they're disappearing at an alarming rate. Have you looked around lately? What used to be habitat is now a shopping mall or something else. And protections for wildlife and natural places, clean air and water are in jeopardy. We hear something every week about somebody dumping sewage into this creek or that creek, or wanting to take up some land that was habitat. So by protecting birds, we're doing a lot of good for Texas. We're safeguarding our natural heritage for future generations. We're preserving our shared quality of life, and we're fostering a healthy environment for all of us. So Romey's going to talk to us about that. And at the end, any questions you might have, we'll deal with those. And he's going to throw some ideas out for us to have a conversation about. So Romey, I'm going to shut up and let you take it away.
Thank you. And I'll share some housekeeping here to kind of kick us off before I share my screen, and then a couple of shameless little plugs for some cool things. So the first thing I want to mention is that I've become increasingly aware that whenever I do a program like this, that I usually run long and leave very little time for questions. So I'm trying to go shorter and leave lots of time for interaction at the end. So I hope that people that are interested in asking questions or participating in a conversation will do so towards the end. I'm also doing something a little bit different about towards the end of this prepared slideshow. I have a kind of pick your own adventure opportunity where I'm going to provide everybody an opportunity to answer a polling question in the chat that will steer the remainder of the conversation for the evening. And then 2 personal notes. If you're interested in seeing the photography and SGCN photography or other species throughout the state, you can always follow me on my Instagram account under my name, romeyswanson.wildlife is the handle, or follow me on Facebook. I'm trying to do a little bit more sharing over there. I like to post a lot of photographs and share vignettes. I don't do political posts or anything to that nature unless they are specific to conservation wins, some of which we'll be discussing today. And then the last housekeeping personal note is I've got, if you saw the presentation earlier this year that discussed my efforts for a herping, reptile and amphibian herping big year in Texas last year in 2021. You might be interested to know that I have a feature article going into Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine next month, November edition. So I've seen the proof for it. It looks great. I'm really happy with the story. It's hard to tell a year-long story in only 1,800 words, but we certainly did our best. So keep an eye out for that. All right. So with that, with those couple of notes and plugs, I'm going to try to share my screen real quick, see if I can do that. All right. So if anybody out there in the audience could just give me a thumbs up that you're seeing a really nice photograph of a summer tanager with the title misspelled species of greatest conservation need. All right. Thank you, Patsy. I appreciate it. So I was asked to kind of speak on this term SGCNs. It's a term that's thrown around a lot. It means species of greatest conservation need. It means a lot of different things to a lot of folks, but these are generally those species that we're concerned with, those species that seem to be declining. It certainly can include endangered and threatened species, but it includes a lot of non-endangered, non-threatened species that are trending kind of that way. That's the very short and brief of it. But what I always like to do is provide some background on why we even care about SGCNs and what they mean to us as Texans and as naturalists and as appreciators of wild places and wildlife. So why I always start off almost every presentation expressing this question or asking this question: why does Texas support such incredible biodiversity? And really, to answer that question, we need to at least understand where we sit within the continent, within the United States. I always think that this slide helps. First off, it illustrates that Texas is really big and that we are centrally located in the continent. And because of that, we sit at the convergence point for several continental scale ecological provinces. So as illustrated in this map, you can see that we have representation of the eastern temperate forest kind of peeking into the big thicket, the piney woods, and some of this post oak belt here. We also have plenty of North American desert influence in the Trans-Pecos ecoregion of the state. We even have a small amount right here in the Guadalupes. This is considered the temperate Sierras that you might think of more along over here in the western part of New Mexico and in Arizona. And then we have an incredible amount of influence from the Central Great Plains. So these are predominantly grasslands, shrublands, and savannas, and that does wrap around and include the coastal prairies and the South Texas plains. So that all sort of illustrates that Texas sits in this convergence point. It's where all of these really unique continental scale ecosystems kind of slam together right here on top of us. And I think it's so cool to know also, and I don't know if I've ever told this group this little factoid, but Texas is the only state in the union where you can see both western and eastern versions of pine forests in a single state. There's no other state where you can see that naturally occurring. So when we zoom into Texas, we see a land of stark contrasts. And the geologically young Texas coast, which spans about 350 miles of dunes and deltas and estuaries, are all at or nearly sea level. And then from the coast, the state tilts gradually upwards to the west, where fossilized reefs and extinct volcanoes express dramatic sky islands amongst the desert sea. And you can find mountain peaks that reach skyward, approaching 8,800 feet above sea level. So we have this incredible spectrum of elevational gradients. The geology and the meteorology and the ecology that occurs throughout the state supports an incredible diversity of habitats and species which rely upon them. For example, Texas is home to 10 to 12 distinct ecological regions. I don't have a map up representing the ecological regions, but a lot of people have seen them, particularly those that have gone through master naturalist training. And there's some debate whether there's 10 or 12, whoever drew the map at the time. But for most intents and purposes, we have about 12 distinct ecological regions. And but however, amongst almost all of those ecological regions, save perhaps the piney woods, it is the grasslands and the rangelands that bind nearly every one of them. And whether it's the vast coastal prairies or the rugged savannas of the Everest Plateau or the semi-arid grasslands of the Chihuahuan Desert, it is grassland ecological situation that a lot of times characterizes Texas in its many distinct ecoregions. And it is these productive rangelands that have shaped a rural economy while underwriting a $12.5 billion cattle industry in Texas. And that industry makes us the leader across the United States. And it is also the stockmen and women who toil to operate sustainably through thin margins while upholding their own personal philosophies around land and wildlife stewardship that drives the decision making and what happens on and how those lands will benefit wildlife, the economies that we talked about, but the wildlife and the land management. So with Texas being predominantly privately owned, it's the decision makers of these private landowners that are ultimately affecting the conservation status of the wildlife that we all care for. And you may wonder, okay, Romey, what we're talking about SGCNs tonight, and I'm going to get there. As you know, we're always going to take a bit of a walk down a couple of rabbit holes here. And the reason I want to hit on this is because I appreciate so much the work of the private landowner and the wildlife stewards across our state. And I always want to speak on their behalf because of the big and overwhelming part that they play. We put an incredible burden on the private landowners to accomplish the conservation that we hope to see across the state. And it's important to understand all of the things that drive them and as they develop personal philosophies around land stewardship. So what is land stewardship? Well, there's a misconception that land stewardship is simply a series of activities, whether it's the way that you graze or how you control brush or whether you lay down fire on those rangelands and grasslands, or if you build stock tanks for the benefit of turtles and waterfowl and other species. But that's generally a misconception. It's certainly part of it, but land stewardship is more so a relationship, a tender, nurturing, caring relationship with the land, where at the dinner table, when decisions and family decisions are being made about the legacy of a property or the legacy of a family's land ownership, the land has a seat at the table, just like mom and pops, granddad, and the kids. Land has a seat at the table and is taken into consideration in those decisions. There's many byproducts that emerge from good land stewardship practices and decisions, including healthy soils. The better you manage your land, the healthier the soil, which drives the vegetation, whether that increases palatability for animals that are foraging on it, like livestock, or providing a diverse forage, diverse structure for those species that depend on grasslands as a part of their natural life cycle. Another byproduct we might think of is a functional water cycle, which benefits humans as much as the wildlife. We all know some of the issues surrounding the state whenever we head into severe drought conditions due to climate change or extreme weather. But we do know that a functional water cycle is almost like a savings account for us. The healthier the land stewardship, the longer we can last into drought, And the longer that our wildlife that depends upon water can last into droughts. Land stewardship also supports a diverse and abundant wildlife scene. So many of these photographs are taken on some of my favorite properties where the landowners are true and fully land stewardship driven. Oh, and by the way, that bottom left photograph is one of a yellow-throated warbler. That's from the Devil's River. That's going to be one of the ones I'm going to toss into the auction for the Bear Audubon Society. Good land stewardship is also a byproduct of good land stewardship is productive and profitable agriculture. The better you manage your land, the longer you can sustain your herd into drought conditions, the better savings account you have in the form of forage for your cattle. And as a byproduct of all of that, you usually have happy, healthy, grassland obligate birds. And then if agriculture feeds our bellies, it is the natural beauty of land stewardship that feeds our souls. Here's a photograph, and I've got a lot of photographs of the Devil's River, but this is the Devil's River corridor and the beautiful scene that is afforded by the land stewardship provided not only by our state park, but also by the Nature Conservancy as a private NGO landowner organization, but also several and many hundreds of thousands of acres of privately conserved ranches along the Devil's River corridor, providing this incredible scenic beauty and destination. So let's jump over into Texas biodiversity. We hit on it briefly as a byproduct of land stewardship, and Texas biodiversity is almost second to none within the United States. You've probably seen this slide before. I've shared this one quite often. Overall, we support the second highest amount of species diversity across the nation. We're number 3 in endemic species, or those species that occur entirely within Texas and nowhere else. We have many species that are like that. And we're number 1 in bird and reptile biodiversity. We do compete with California for number 1. Their state list is actually a bit more robust than ours. But if you look at those species that rely on the state as a part of their natural life cycle, meaning they're resident, overwintering, migratory, or breeding, then we're perhaps number 1 compared to California, despite their bigger state list. They enjoy a lot of vagrantism over there and a lot of pelagic species way off their shoreline on their list, and we do too. And then we're number 2 in overall mammal and plant diversity. And I like these illustrations here because they sort of showcase Texas when you're looking through the lens of just bird diversity, of those species that rely on an area as part of their naturally occurring life cycle. Again, whether breeding, or whether resident, breeding, overwintering, or a migratory stopover species. And then you can look at that heat map just warming up almost the entirety of Texas when you look through the reptile diversity. We really support an incredible amount of reptile diversity in the state. But we'd also have a ton of conservation challenges. And I like this slide because it illustrates that although Texas is 95% privately owned, that does mean that the private landowners overwhelmingly carry the responsibility of land stewardship, and most conservation initiatives just aren't practical without the private landowners' buy-in. What we know about Texas, in addition to all the wonderful statistics in the biodiversity realm, we also lead the country in the 2.2 million acres of working lands or open space that were converted to non-agricultural uses between 1997 and 2017. So said another way, over 20 years, we lost 2.2 million acres of otherwise viable habitat to non-agricultural uses, meaning that they were probably converted to concrete roofs or shopping malls. Perhaps even more alarming in that trend, however, is that 1.2 million of those acres were converted in the last 5 years from 2012 to 2017. We currently have about 29 million Texans today, and that number is expected to grow to 50 million by 2050. So about 28 years from now, we will have about 21 million more people living in the state of Texas. And that will predominantly happen, as I draw this triangle on your screen, in what we call the Golden Triangle over here of Texas, which is Houston up to Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and back down to the San Antonio-Austin corridor. Most of those people are going to land in that segment of the state. So when you think about 50 million people by 2050, that means we're averaging about 1,200 new residents per day. So every day that goes by, 1,200 new people enter the state and move here. And then each day we also lose approximately 1 square mile of working lands, or 640 acres, immense amount. And I always point out, ever since it came out, you'd have to have your head buried in the sand to know that we've lost nearly 3 billion birds since 1970, or one in every 4 that existed in 1970 are no longer around today, and that that birds are not hit evenly across all the taxonomic guilds. Some species are increasing, like Patsy said earlier, with waterfowl. Some species are most other species are decreasing, and some are decreasing sharply. Here's a graphic that I like to share. And the reason I talk about grasslands and Texas' big role in grasslands is because, going back here, is because we have grassland birds at about a 53% loss over the last 5 decades, or over half of the individuals that existed because of land use conversion, in particular, pesticide uses, all sorts of impacts there. And that is the highest loss rate of any of the guilds measured within this study. So we have a lot of species at risk in the state of Texas due to the different conservation challenges, and also because we have a lot of species. In 2002, a precursor to our modern day Texas Conservation Action Plan, the NatureServe, listed about 10% of all species in Texas were at some level of risk, with about almost 3% of birds. And today we have a Texas Conservation Action Plan. I'll speak to what that is a little bit more here in a slide or two, that outlines about 1,300 different SGCNs, or species of greatest conservation need, of which 110 species of birds are listed as an SGCN. And nationwide, if you look at all of the states combined and all of the native tribal territories combined, we have about 1,200 individual species of greatest conservation need within the United States. What is a species of greatest conservation need? Well, effectively, it is a list of species designated within the 56 state wildlife action plans, which identify those species in most need of conservation action in that state or the U.S. territory. And so why do we have 56? Well, it's because we have 6 territories that are participants within our program. If you look at it graphically, I talked a little bit earlier about endangered species and threatened species are certainly SGCNs, but SGCNs do not make necessarily a threatened or endangered species. So if we look at the chart or the graphic here, on the y-axis is population stability, or the trend of the population. The x-axis is the time. So we're looking forward through time from a point in space. And if the population is beginning to decline through time, we start to become a bit concerned. And at some point, it becomes concerning enough to say, hey, wait, we got something going on here. We should probably really take a look at this species. Now, there's no real mechanisms to really dig deep, whether it's regulatory outside of stewardship principles and philosophy, just a landowner that cares, or an organization, NGO built around a particular species that cares for it. So there's no mechanism that would say, hey, it's time to intervene, until really you get to a threatened status or an endangered status through federal or state listing criteria. And so what we did was we said, well, what if we were to start looking at species when they first started to decline, and the cost to intervene at that point may be much smaller than a threatened or endangered status. We wouldn't have to evoke regulatory hurdles for industry, and we may be able to get greater returns on investment if we can put the right resources into it. So we designate an SGCN as a species that is declining, that needs to be, we need to have a pulse on its trends, and maybe outline a few interventions that could correct its course. So that's great to know. It's great to know about SGCNs, but without resources, without money, conservation is really just conversation. So that's what this point is to have a list of animals, to be aware of them, and then to go looking for the resources to effect appropriate conservation. When I was doing a little bit of research today, I came across a couple of interesting websites. I'll be real happy to summarize this maybe in a quick bullet sheet that I can share for distribution if anybody's interested in it. But there's a USGS, so the United States Geological Survey or Service, State Wildlife Action Plan tool. This is a tool that you can use to search any state's listed species or species of greatest conservation need. You can filter it through different sets of criteria, whether they were on the most recent listing, SGCN listing for all the states, and the states have to renew their action plans and update their species list every 5 years. So you can start to search through there. You can search for the species. You can search the state. So this is an interesting tool. And then Texas Parks and Wildlife's actual conservation action plan. So the other states call them wildlife action plans. In Texas, will be changing theirs. We're the only state that calls ours a TCAP instead of a state wildlife action plan, a SWAP. But here's a website to land on this page, the Texas Conservation Action Plan, where we have several handbooks. Each of the ecological regions has its own dedicated handbook or action plan with a list of species associated with it. Lots of really good resources here. And then I wanted to mention also that we have existing funding mechanisms to affect conservation on behalf of species of greatest conservation need. They're primarily called the State Wildlife Grants Program, which provides, I think, nationwide around $70 million a year doled out to each of the states. And I think Texas receives somewhere around $1 million from this funding mechanism. It's not enough to go around to affect the 1,200, 1,300 species we have listed, but it is a meaningful program that provides some funding for the state to do some work that needs to be done. I wanted to just take a second to walk through a couple of bills that have recently passed or are being considered to be passed federally that could provide meaningful returns for conservation and species of greatest conservation need. We know that the infrastructure bill is providing tons and tons of money through existing mechanisms like, for instance, anybody that's worked with the NRCS, which is a Natural Resources Conservation Service. There's a few programs that provide funding for conservation easement purchases or land improvement, habitat improvement, and those are doled out in the Farm Bill. Well, the infrastructure bill has taken the amount of money that currently exists dedicated over the next couple of years and tripled and quadrupled it in cases to make the scale and scope much larger. And this is a wonderful signal because it indicates that the federal government and perhaps some of the state governments are starting to see the utility of thinking about working lands as critical infrastructure for the United States and for each of the states because of all of the wonderful ecosystem services that they provide to people in the communities through clean water, aquifer recharge, but also wildlife habitat. And if we're going to course correct, or if we're going to impact meaningful land, meaningful property on behalf of species of greatest conservation need, like these are the mechanisms that exist today, the bank accounts that exist today that can be utilized to do that. Everyone, and I mean everyone, is watching this one right here, Recovering America's Wildlife Act. I'm going to jump into that in just a second. But I also wanted to mention that there's a couple of other bills here of particular interest: the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act and the Migratory Bird Protection Act, the Migratory Bird Protection Act, I believe, is the one that would solidify or codify protections provided by Migratory Bird Treaty Act in the way that we should be interpreting it, as opposed to providing it as executive fiat, as we saw, the dismantling of during the Trump administration. Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act. It's new legislation. I think it's going to help pump some more money into the existing migratory bird joint ventures, of which there's 5 that operate within the state of Texas. The one in your neck of the woods is sort of, depending on where you live, which county you live in, it's either going to be the Oaks and Prairies joint venture, which covers kind of San Antonio up back towards Oklahoma, or the Rio Grande joint venture, which covers all of South Texas and the Trans-Pecos. But Recovering America's Wildlife Act, when you want to talk about species of greatest conservation need, this is the bill that you want to know about. I've got a link up here. If you ever want to track the progress of some of these bills, you can go to that link right there, and you would see that House Resolution 2773, Recovering America's Wildlife Act of 2021, passed the House with a 231 to 190 margin, bipartisan support, mostly democratically supported, but a few Republicans came over. It's now being considered in the Senate. The funding. The act would provide $1.3 billion in dedicated funding annually for the implementation of those state Fish and Wildlife Agency wildlife action plans. But it would also provide an additional $97.5 million in dedicated funding annually for tribal agencies. This would also allot 10% of those dedicated funds towards the implementation of competitive grant programs aimed at fostering regional cooperation among states. So this would force states to stop siloing and start working cooperatively across those geopolitical lines if they want to unlock some portion of the funding. And then what's really cool about it is it leveraged funds from the state agencies, universities, and NGOs like y'all and us and Audubon Texas to boost the power of the federal conservation spending. So that $1.3 billion can only be unlocked with a state match of a quarter. So for every dollar that a state pitches in, the feds would pitch in $3 from that pot of $1.3 billion. And what we like about it in the state of Texas, the great conservative state of Texas, is that it would provide greater regulatory certainty for industry and private partners by allowing us to affect conservation on those SGCNs before they get to endangered species listings and invoke those sort of federal protections. And then maybe just as importantly as anything, it would empower wildlife professionals to hold the nation's wildlife in the public trust for the generations to come by providing state and tribal agencies with the flexibility to conserve populations in an effective and cost-efficient manner. Said another way, when you know that you're going to have this much money this year and this much money next year and this much money the next year, you can start making longer term strategic decisions as opposed to the whims of a legislative body that appropriate on a year-to-year basis. And it may be $100 million one year and $20 million next year and $200 million next year. It's hard to make decisions and be consistent in affecting strategic conservation planning. So that's an important criteria of having a dedicated funding mechanism. So what can you do right now? I think the most important thing is to call our senators. We have 2 senators that are not signed on or seem to be supportive currently. Ted Cruz may be a lost cause, but it doesn't hurt because we can only right now call 2 people. It's not like we're trying to call 30 or 40 different representatives to try to gain their support. That's done. So I think that Ted Cruz needs to hear from us still, and I do think that Senator Cornyn is in play. He is certainly not going to be a co-sponsor for the bill, but I think that he's a possible yes vote if we keep applying enough pressure to his office. If this bill passes, and we're hopeful that it could pass before perhaps even the end of October, Texas would start receiving $53.6 million per year for the purpose of enacting the state wildlife conservation plan. And again, $53.6 million that would need to be leveraged by another $12 to $15 million that originates from the state. So we're looking at a lot of dollars dedicated. This would fundamentally transform Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. As I say there in the last bullet, this is good for hunters and anglers because right now they are hunters and anglers through hunting licenses, Pittman-Robertson excise taxes, Dingell-Johnson excise taxes are funding about 95% of Texas Parks and Wildlife's wildlife division, with the remainder coming from the state wildlife action plan or state wildlife grants, horned lizard license or conservation license plate sales. I mean, so all of us that have that are kind of plugging a little bit of the hole, but about 95 to 97% of the dollars that support parks and wildlife divisions are coming from hunters and anglers. And this funding would provide incredible parity where that split might look closer to something like 50-50 or even 60-40 in favor of management of SGN. So it could fundamentally transform the way that Parks and Wildlife does its work. I linked a YouTube video down here that digs into RAWA a bit more. I'm seeing that I'm already kind of running a little bit long-winded, so I'm going to pass that, but I may link it in the series of links that I've shared for y'all to take a look at. It's about a 4-minute video that touches on it. It's inspiring, directed by Ben Masters and narrated by Ben Masters, our friend. And with that, I was just going to say, maybe we can do with the remainder of our time. I want it to be conversational, and I thought we could go one of 3 directions. So this is a pick your own adventure opportunity. In the chat, I'd like you to tell me A, B, or C. Do we want to go with a roundtable discussion to further discuss Texas SGCNs, where you guys prompt me and we can just have a little conversation? I've got about 20 slides that I can jump into to provide species accounts for SGCNs of the herping Texas big year I did last year. So those are all reptiles and amphibians. Or we can talk about my favorite mammal SGCN right now, which I'm very much involved with some advocacy to support improved management in the state for mountain lions. I'm going to stop the share there, look in the chat and see how we're going, and hopefully we can get a little bit more conversational here.
If everyone will put your choice in there, there's B, that's choice B. That was the herps, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then we have mountain lion C, that's a couple of those. We have the SGC. A was SG, B is getting a lot of play here. We really want to hear it all, but we know we don't have time to hear it all. So
He's making a comeback, huh?
While people are doing this, there's a question. If we could pose that to have hear your
let's do the questions.
Okay, it says are the SGCN, is that a target area to invest in if the Wildlife Recovery Act gets signed? Will that be kind of a first?
Yeah, so the money that would come from Recovering America's Wildlife Act can only be spent on SGCNs.
Okay. Well, that really makes a
Yeah.
difference, because we got
So that's
1,200
why
SBC.
that bill even exists, is to provide the states funding. Because the way it works right now, we have this incredible model, the North American Wildlife Conservation Model, and it's founded in 7 pillars, and it really is an incredible way of doing business. One day we maybe talk about all those things, but that combined with the way that we fund our DNRs, our Department of Natural Resources, ours is Texas Parks and Wildlife, like combined to create the scenario where Parks and Wildlife largely now, because of the way that they're funded and the way that we do conservation in North America, are answering to a constituency primarily of hunters and anglers, which is fine. I mean, we have an incredible legacy of great work done. The recovery of elk, white-tailed deer, wild turkey. I mean, really and largely shouldered by sportsmen and sportswomen. But what it has created is, and particularly maybe we can make this argument in the state of Texas, is that we don't have the same meaningful tools and resources at our disposal to affect conservation for all of those species that aren't hunted or fished. So the thinking for decades has been, how do we do that? How do we provide parity and opportunities to the states? Some states do it on their own. Colorado's got a great mechanism of to kind of help out on some of these problems. Florida's another really good example. So we're looking at 2 points on the political spectrum, perhaps, so that we can see a conservative approach and a little bit more of a liberal approach, perhaps. In Texas, though, we're so different from so many of the other states. What I always point out, and I hate to be critical, but we don't tax, we don't enforce the limited amount of regulation that we do have, and we don't pay for conservation in a meaningful way in our state. So that's why I talk about the private landowner. The private landowner shoulders, usually voluntarily or as a part of land ownership responsibility, a heavy burden with very little incentive and payout outside of the markets that are built. I've talked about Audubon conservation ranching as being an incentive for ranchers to produce beef to sell to markets like ours, where we might pay a little bit more as an incentive for them doing and exacting good best management practices in their beef production operations to also benefit grassland birds. So anyway, kind of a long-winded answer, but as I always point out, you pull the string and I'm just going to go until I won't.
Well, the truth is it's all connected, and you've offered us 3 things to, is there any way to make a combination, say a little bit about a couple of bird species that you're particularly interested in? There's a lot of interest. If those of you have seen the Deep in the Heart, that's Ben Masters is the one that Romey mentioned. He was the director, and Matthew McConaughey was the narrator of it. It's an excellent, you can get it off the internet now and watch it. And it talks a lot about the mountain lion situation, which is basically classified as a varmint that anybody can shoot anytime, as many times as you want. So I don't know. I don't have a way of summing these things up.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to share. So the Deep in the Heart film is incredible, and if you haven't seen it, go see it. In the link that I just shared is the link to the Recovering America's Wildlife Act video that Ben Masters directed and narrates, that he produced for our initiative here. And what I'll do then is perhaps just jump into a little conversation. It looks like we got a lot of C's, and in the beginning was B's. I've already talked about herps, so we'll do mountain lions, and I'll sprinkle a bird or 2 in there. Just to kind of get started, let me go with birds, birding group. A couple of things that Audubon Texas, in partnership with all of our friends across the state, whether NGOs, agencies, or the distributed chapter network, one of the things that are top of mind that we're really going to be focusing on. And by the way, Patsy, I don't know who, and Britt, I don't know who all is going to be showing up at the chapter roundup on November 4th, but I'm super eager to see some of these faces live, and to be, you have one of the most motivated state staff groupings to become more ingrained and involved with each of the chapters. And it doesn't matter if it's the Houston Audubons with the multi-million-dollar budgets, all the way down to the Laredo Audubon group. It is, puts on the festival, and a beautiful birding group that is all volunteer. Like, we are super encouraged to be more communicative, involved, and supportive of all of the chapters. So let me point that out. With that deep breath, I will add that the things that I'm in the conservation delivery world. So, we're starting to have more staff at the state level, good staff at the state level, and that's providing us the opportunity to sort of delegate and distribute workloads, and really, I've had a jack of all trades type of position for the 4 years I've been with Audubon Texas, and now I'm getting to truly do more of what I was hired to do, which is to oversee conservation delivery across the entirety of the state, but also to develop a private lands focused service, so that we have this incredible legacy on the Texas coast. We're celebrating 100 years of operating in the state of Texas beginning in 2023, primarily through the leased Rookery Islands arrangement in the bays and estuaries. And what's unfortunate about that is that you all and a lot of birders and the general public, and certainly people from El Paso and Amarillo, never get to see the work that we do on these islands. They're mostly inaccessible. They're managed for the benefit of these rookeries. And as you know, you got thousands of birds on these islands concentrated. This is where they do all their nesting. And it's hard to tell the story of why 7 acres is so critically important. And that millions of dollars investment in 7 acres is worth it. I sometimes have to say, hey, how many acres would I have to touch to affect conservation for 1,000 golden-cheeked warblers? That'd be a pretty damn big footprint, right? Well, just because these birds concentrate on an island footprint that is critically imperiled with the raising tides and the pervasive wakes from passing ships, and then recreationists, fishermen, and people letting their dogs out for a quick potty break while they're fishing with their pets. Like, there's a lot of threats to those islands. But so that is kind of our legacy, and our way we're thinking about is to continue to do that good work, to grow into the private sector so that we can affect conservation. Okay, so American oyster catcher is a big one on the coast. They're losing a lot of habitat. They're producing just fine. They produce their babies, they're breeding, but those babies don't have anywhere to colonize. So you got a bunch of juveniles just staging, lurking in the background with nowhere to go pair up and nest because they're territorial. They don't concentrate on islands. They space out. They're territorial. So that's a big one because they require a special type of shell hash substrate, emergent, low-lying islands, no vegetation. So that's a big one. Black skimmers are colonial. They do concentrate, but they're suffering for a myriad of reasons. We're keeping an eye on those. In the private land sector, all of our endangered species, we got 29 species of federally and state listed birds in the state of Texas. So we're kind of keeping a pulse on that. The big champion is always the golden-cheeked warbler. We love, should be the state bird. And in the West, we're watching Baird sparrows and other species, Oplomato falcon on the coast, but can we see them restored in the grasslands of far West Texas? It's kind of an uphill battle there. All sorts of birds out there that we're looking at through different lenses, different critical lenses.
Well, Becca would never forgive me if I didn't say the word shrike.
What is that? I'm teasing. I'm teasing. Yeah. So, an interesting thing that I'm aware of about shrikes is that the coastal shrike population seems to be kind of like our red-tailed hawk situation, where you have year-round residency across most of the state. But during the winter in particular, we start to receive the migratory birds in addition to our resident birds. So there's a lot of birds that we assume are kind of like breeding up in the eastern part of the country, and that they come after their breeding and they come and backfill around our resident bird or resident shrikes, particularly on the Texas Gulf Coast. And we're really interested in keeping track of them because that eastern population, that eastern migratory population, seems to be suffering. So that's one interesting thing. So that's also like kind of like that phenomena of why during the winter it seems like we have 4 times as many red-tailed hawks, because some percentage of them are migratory and some percentage of them seem to be resident, and it's just sort of an interesting phenomena. That's what I got on shrikes. I do have I was working with, I'm just rambling. We may not even get into mountain lions, y'all.
You better get into mountain lions a little bit, or we're going to have a lot of really angry seas out here.
You got it. I'm going to get a website up too, so I can share for some more learning if we don't get to it. The cool thing I wanted to finish off about shrikes, so you mentioned deep in the heart earlier, and several of you may already know that I had a small role, but I got a title at the end as this lead science consultant for Ben's movie Deep in the Heart. A real honor to get to work with him. Such a visionary, and that cinematography team, those videographers were incredible. If at any time anybody ever wants to do a showing, a screening or whatever, I'm helping set those up for them, and also like Q&As with perhaps even Ben or some of the some of the cinematographers. So if that's ever interesting, maybe we can set something like that up. But Ben reached out to me for another project, a very similar type of story being told, and there were 2 parts they wanted to do in Texas. One was on wild turkey, and so we connected them with the Llano River Field Station out there in Junction, where there's lots of turkey roosting, and they're very accommodating. And then the other story that would happen in Texas is the caching and courtship mechanisms of loggerhead shrikes in Texas, probably going to be filmed in and around the Monaghan sand sheet area. So lots of cool prickly things to find the critters that they cache there. So there's your loggerhead shrike nod. If we're going to talk about mountain lions, I'm going to share a website and the link here that will be kind of your opportunity to do a deep dive in. I have been personally, not wearing an Audubon hat, personally involved with a group called Texans for Mountain Lions. I'm one of the 6 principals for this coalition. And we filed a petition to Texas Parks and Wildlife in June, outlining 6 recommendations to help with the management of mountain lions. And the reason that we believe that mountain lions need attention and different management in the state of Texas is, just as Patsy pointed out, mountain lions are treated like varmin or varmints. They're considered non-game animals, so they're not protected in any way. Outside of, if you want to take a mountain lion, you have to have a hunting license, and you have to have landowner permission, and then that's about it. You can take as many as you want by any means. You don't even have to shoot them with a rifle. You can take them with traps. There are no trap standards. If you're out trying to trap a mountain lion with a foothold trap, you don't have to check that trap. Best practices for most trapping, and we support the wildlife managers generally support trapping as a means to resolve wildlife conflict and other things. And there's a whole fur trade that's very well regulated. And in those, there's criteria around trap check times. Like, look, we don't want an animal in there hung up, suffering and dying from exposure. We want them to be quickly taken if that's the intent, or removed if that's a non-target species. So unfortunately, lions are not afforded any sort of best management practices in that way. And we have seen over the last few years, a limited but growing amount of research that is indicating that our Texas mountain lions are declining. There's generally considered two populations in the state of Texas, a South Texas population and a West Texas population. And the South Texas population seems to be declining significantly, maybe perhaps as much as or more than 50+%, whereas the West Texas population seems to be sustaining itself, but it seems to also be experiencing about a 50%. Any individual in that population seems to be experiencing somewhere around a 50% year-over-year loss. So that means that, if we have 40 people in the Zoom room right now, and they are mountain lions in Texas, in West Texas, that half of you will not make it to 2023. And but we're seeing backfilling occurring from transient young lions out of Mexico and New Mexico, perhaps. So that population seems to be stable, but the demographics of it are a bit concerning. The South Texas population is really the one we're really concerned about. So within our petition to Parks and Wildlife, we outlined 6 criteria. Said, hey, if we're going to kill mountain lions, we need to report them. Mandatory harvest reporting. No big deal, right? Hunter takes one, let Parks and Wildlife know. That's a rule. That's one way that we can keep a up-to-date data point on the take of mountain lions, and maybe even some information around demographics. Who's more likely to be taken, a female, a young one, a male. So we have that. We have a request for statewide monitoring of mountain lions. And then I think of those as kind of the data collection points. And then we have 2 ethical points, one of which is to say we should really probably consider having a 36-hour trap check time for mountain lions at minimum as a best management practice. By the way, we're the only state in the country with a mountain lion population that allows trapping. And then the other one is a removal of the allowance of canned hunting. So this is where you would catch a lion in a trap live, release it for the specific purpose of a hunter being able to take it. It's not fair chase. It's not an ethical practice. It's known to occur. Historically, it doesn't seem to occur much anymore, but there is a kind of a loophole in statute that allows for that to happen. And it's an ugly look for hunters. Generally, nobody supports it. And then we get into sort of the management of lions. And because this group is very sensitive to hunters, to landowners, to ranchers, we didn't want to project like we knew everything. We don't think that management decisions that we're the best as advocates for lions think that we necessarily should be injecting ourselves over heavy-handedly into the management of lions. So what we said is a stakeholder advisory group should be formed by Parks and Wildlife to inform the decisions of a management plan, but that a management plan should be made so that we have transparency, accountability, and responsibility to the public's interest, but also keeping as many tools that are needed for the landowners to remain viable in the operations of their properties. And that hunters and sportsmen and sportswomen have the opportunity today and in the future to take lions if they choose to. I think it's an incredible skill. It's an incredible, it's not something I'm necessarily interested in doing. I'd rather shoot a lion with a camera than with a gun. But I think that, that's an opportunity that people should have, and that we should be managing for that consistent surplus of take in the future. But right now, Texas doesn't have even a pulse on lion, a very good pulse on the lion population, and we have no means or backstop of course correcting if we do find out that they are tanking, perhaps already tanking in South Texas. So those are the elements of that management recommendations. This is not a new issue. Audubon, National Audubon Society, in partnership with Sierra Club and Defenders of Wildlife back in the 90s, petitioned Parks and Wildlife to classify lions as a game animal. The petition was denied, and it started and sparked one of the largest controversies within the state of Texas that hasn't to date been unresolved. Texas, a lot of times, chooses to go with voluntary tools routes. They don't want to enact regulation, because they really do think as a conservative state we can work with voluntary means and incentives to accomplish the same things. But I would argue that with 30 years of history to document that there's been no meaningful progress made on this real concern.
Well, that was great. That was a great summary. I think we're going to have to kind of
wind it down
here, but these are the kind of, as I understand it now, we don't have, let me just look here in the chat and see if there's any questions that are remaining. We did have a comment that somebody had been out on the Hart Ranch, and I was going to announce, and there she is on the screen. There's Georgina Schwartz, and she wanted everybody to know that she's going home tomorrow, back to her house, and she's been in some, yes, it is, and wanted to announce that. And also, I wanted to announce, thank you, first of all, again, to thank Romey for his kind donation. And if anyone else in the audience has anything that they would like to donate to the auction, if you'd like to contact Britt Coleman, the president of the Bear Audubon Society, his contact is on our website. And maybe you have an uncle or friend or whatever who has a B&B or something that would be of interest to people who love the outdoors and want to get out and explore some of the different areas around here. So if you have those kind of ideas, we welcome those, and we welcome all. The auction will be open to everyone. So when it does open, if you would share that with your friends and family and so forth. And when we open it up, it'll be open for 2 weeks, and we'll announce the winning bids at Doug Ptolemy's talk on the 3rd. And of course, we'll have the raffle for that. So contact your senator about RAWA. Send one every day. They'd love that. That gives their staff something to do. And include Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz. Maybe we'll make some headway there. And we continue to work with the public, and the public is an important aspect. So if people ask and you know these things, you are more well informed than the average person. And Romey is a resource he's a rich resource. We know we can reach out to him. So if you have questions or somebody wants to talk to him about their land or something like that, Romey, they can contact the Audubon Texas office, and maybe you can put them in contact with whoever they need to talk to. And
yeah, I put my email in the chat. And I encourage anybody that wants to have a conversation offline about any of the topics that we got to or didn't got to please reach out. I'm, very happy, very animated. I'm putting a lot of my personal passion, particularly behind the lion issue right now, and recovering America's Wildlife Act, both professionally and personally.
Okay, and I want to remind everyone that this session is recorded, and we will put the links that turned up in the on the slideshow. It went by so fast, I was trying to write some of them down, and I don't think I got them all, but we'll post this video on our Vimeo channel tomorrow, and you can watch it, and there you can stop it, and you can get those things. Anything that was put in the chat, we will put those in the description of the video. And then if none of us can figure it out, we'll contact Romey. And Romey, you have a standing invitation to come, and anytime that you've got something on your mind or your heart, we would like to look at maybe doing, if we could have some deep in the heart Q&A with some of the people that were involved.
Yeah.
Becca would be the person that you would talk to about that. She sets up our programs. So anybody on our board would be happy to talk to you about that. And several of us are planning to come to the chapter, what do you call it? The roundup. Chapter roundup. And anyone out there who's a member of Bear Audubon, if you want to go, you don't have to be an officer, you don't have to be on the board. If you want to go to Austin on November the 4th, which is the day after Doug Ptolemy's talk, and you want to go, a couple of us are going, we'd be happy to carpool with you. So all of these things are exciting, and there are ways for us as individuals to get involved and make a difference. So thank you, Romey. Appreciate you so much. And we may have some exciting ideas for some outings connected here. We're working on some things for the spring. So thank you all for coming and for listening and for participating and putting your A, B's, and C's in that poll and so forth. So we'll see you next month, as there's lots of stuff going on. Remember, rodenticides, anticoagulant rodenticides. That's the what. Try that out at your next cocktail party, and you'll just make lots of friends that way, I'm sure. So thank you all, and we're going to call it an evening. And Romey, take good care of yourself. The Texas and the wildlife of Texas need you, and we
thank you.
We love you. Okay.
My heart goes out to all y'all. Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.